Good morning and welcome to How to Become an Effective Leader. My name is Julie Allen, for those of you who have not met me before. I see from both the registration list and those that have joined us live this morning, there are a number of you that have attended these webinars before, so welcome back. It's great to see that these are clearly useful and that you are returning. For those of you that have been before and those that haven't, as you join Crowdcast, I want you to know that we are live and we are now recording. All these webinars that I do are all recorded, and you will find a library of all the recordings available if you click the Follow Me button at the top right of your screen. Follow Me means that you will also be able to be updated with all webinars that I'll be providing in the future. So let's get started with this morning's topic. So we are here to talk about how to become an effective leader. What you'll be seeing now on the screen is the slides that I will be using this morning. So what I'm going to do now, just very briefly, for those of you that are new to Crowdcast, is just to show you around how Crowdcast works. So I talked about the Follow Us button or Follow Me button at the top right-hand side of the screen. What you'll also see is the chat box, which I've started and Michael has clearly followed. And you'll see, so get chatting and please introduce yourself. I'd love to know who you are. And one of the other things that I'd love to really know and understand for the next hour is, why are you here this morning? So why is becoming an effective leader so important to you? Please don't feel shy. Please get chatting on the chat box. What you'll see is just down on the bottom middle of the screen, you'll see Ask a Question. Other than the chat, if you have an important question that you'd like me to answer, please use Ask a Question. It just means that your question won't get lost in the chat box. There is a poll button here as well. I won't be conducting any polls this morning. But what you do have is a Get in Touch button. So you can see down at the bottom middle of your screen is Book a 30-minute complimentary call. As a result of what you're hearing this morning, if you'd like to get in touch to have a chat about your own requirements as an individual or your requirements as an organisation, and you just simply like to have a chat for 30 minutes about what's going on, please use that button. If you click that button, it will take you through to an automated diary booking system. So please do feel free to use that and get in touch. Over on the bottom left of your screen, you'll see Clip Moment, and that enables you to clip a moment from this webinar and share that should you wish. Okay, so now we have walked around Crowdcast and how to use it. So a little bit about me while I give you some time to use the chat box. As I say, please introduce yourself, who you are, and what you'd like to get from this 1 hour webinar. You're here for a particular reason, and I'd love to know what that is. So a little bit about myself. I am a business improvement specialist for over 20 years. I specialise in improving psychological flexibility. We will be talking a little bit about that this morning because that is hugely important in terms of effective leadership. And psychological flexibility gives us the ability to move towards what's important in life, even in the presence of unwanted difficulties and obstacles. I also create psychological safety in workplaces, and again we're going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of this webinar, because that's important in terms of developing teamwork within the organisation. We want people to feel safe psychologically when they come to work, and as I say, we'll talk a little bit about that later. The other thing I do as well is I provide assessments through Thomas International. Those are two areas. One is emotional intelligence using the Trait Emotional Intelligence Questionnaire, and the other is a personality profile assessment. So those are questionnaires that you complete, which will help you to understand yourself better and also help you to identify your areas of improvement. In addition, I also provide strategic planning support in terms of defining the organisational purpose, vision, values, priorities, and plans to achieve those. Okay, so this morning, the key areas of focus we're going to look at is what you need to do to move towards becoming an effective leader. I would like, as always, for these sessions to be fun and interactive, but also informative. So I'll be talking you through a variety of slides that I'm going to use. And those of you that are familiar with the pattern of these webinars is there is an element where you will become, I hope then you will become very interactive when I'm asking lots of questions and pulling together everything that we're talking about. And during that time, we will be talking about what might be showing up for you that's getting in the way of you becoming an effective leader. Those are things, I suppose, quite often we don't want to share, we don't want other people to know. But as you'll go through this webinar, you'll understand that this is something that is important. So the benefits of effective leadership. If you've got effective leadership in your organisation, you'll have loyalty and satisfaction. You'll see here I've highlighted a survey from Gallup, and they had surveyed 2 million employees in over 700 organisations. If you've attended some of my webinars before, you'll see that I've used this quote before, because I think it's important to understand that the employee's time in the business and their productivity is directly correlated to the relationship with their immediate supervisor. Therefore, already in terms of talking about effective leadership, we know that the relationship that you have with those people that you are leading is hugely important. And it's important that you spend the time doing that. Because as a result of developing that relationship, what you will have is loyalty, satisfaction, and also employee engagement and retention, and an increase in productivity, a reduction in waste, and that people will have a clear sense of direction and what's important, because after all, that is what leadership is all about. We know when there is effective leadership as well that the people will find innovative ways of doing things. And so the question for you today is, what is loyalty and satisfaction like within your organisations? Do you measure loyalty and satisfaction? Do you conduct employee engagement surveys? And if you don't and you're interested, well, again, use the book a 30-minute complimentary session, because again, what I can do is talk you through employee engagement and the engagement surveys that I would use. A quote here that I have, again from Gallup, that I found more recently, is your manager has more impact on your health than your doctor. So the benefits of effective leadership is well-being, not only for yourself, but also for the team that you are leading. And that might be one that might surprise you, but really no surprise, I think, because people spend a huge amount of time at their work. I think 60% of people's time is spent working. Therefore, you have much more impact on them and their lives than perhaps other relationships that they might have. Quote here just to get us started on effective leadership. And so in the past, jobs were about muscles. Now they're about brains. But in the future, they'll be about heart. So really what we're talking about now is the emotional aspect of leadership. Leadership is about appealing to people's emotions. Therefore, we have to think about heart. We have to think about the impact that we have on others, and whether that impact is positively impacting on them, or is it having a negative impact? Therefore, back to the quote around you have more impact on a person's well-being than their doctor might have. In looking at how to become an effective leader today, what I'd like to do is to share with you Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, I see, even just looking at the chat box, I see we're still a little bit shy. So those of you that have just joined us, I would really appreciate it if you could just introduce yourself in the chat box, who you are and why you are here this morning, what you'd particularly like to get from this session. What's happening now that is intriguing you to think about your leadership style and becoming more effective. So please do get involved in the chat box. Michael started us off earlier this morning by saying good morning, and good morning to all of you. So please, I'd appreciate it if you could get involved, because that will also help just in terms of considering some of what I'm going to talk about. So get typing, get chatting. Okay, so the 7 habits of highly effective people. Stephen Covey's 7 habits. If I start with the first 3, you'll see at the bottom of this circle. Habit 1, be proactive. Habit 2, begin with the end in mind. And habit 3, put first things first. These 3 habits are all about managing yourself. And they are about moving from dependence to independence. The top of our circle here, you will see that the remaining 4 habits are then about leading others. Habit 4, think win-win. Habit 5, seek first to understand, then to seek first to understand, then to be understood. And habit 6, then I should say, is synergize. And really then, in looking at leading others, helps us to move from independence to interdependence. And then habit 7 circles and embodies all of the other habits. And habit 7 is sharpening the soul. And that's about you then unleashing your potential. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk through each and every one of those habits. And I'm going to give you something to think about in relation to those habits. Stephen, thank you. So Stephen would like to improve how I work effectively, innovate and motivate my team. Thank you, Stephen. Rachel, thank you also. You're in Sure Start. Welcome, both Stephen and Rachel. Thank you for joining us. And want to update your skills to help you with supporting a bigger team. Okay, so the steps that I'm going to talk through now should really help you to step back, because that's what these webinars are about. It's 60 minutes to allow you to step back from your day-to-day tasks and to think about what you're doing and to identify some improvements. So first of all, we're starting with habit 1, and that's be proactive. So habit 1 then looks at proactive people and recognize that they are responsible for their life, their behaviour, their results, and their growth. They don't blame other people or situations. They choose how they want to behave and the results that they want to achieve. So being proactive is then, if we're going to be responsible for our behaviour, one of the things about being proactive is about being self-aware. So what I want you to do for a moment, take just your pen and paper, and what I want you to do in terms of being self-aware is I want you to write 3 statements that start with I am. So you are, who are you? So Stephen and Rachel, I am. What is your view of yourself? 3 simple statements there that describe who you are. That is your view of yourself. So 3 statements on I am. And that you might write, I am a business owner. I am kind. I am considerate. Those are clearly what you might perceive to be positive statements, but I'm just giving you some examples. So I am, even if you want to think about your leadership and your leadership style, what do you think that is? So I am. And the other thing now to think about is what are others' view of you in terms of you as a leader? Do you think that your view of yourself and your team's view of you, are they the same? Do the two match? So being proactive could be you considering how you behave and respond, being emotionally intelligent. And again, I'm going to talk through some of the detail of that towards the end of the webinar. And also to think then, or to ask people for your view, their view of you. Being proactive as well might be, for some of you that have attended other webinars, you'll know I've talked about the stop, start and continue. So in terms of being proactive, you could select a random sample of employees within your team, or you could ask everybody, and you could ask them to give you 3 things that they would like you to stop, start and continue doing. And that will also give you an indication of their view of you in terms of your behaviour, results and growth. But that helps you then to develop a plan in terms of being proactive. So moving then into habit 2. Habit 2 is beginning with the end in mind. So if we begin with the end in mind, we're focusing our time and our energy on things that can be controlled. So Covey talks about all things can be created twice. So if we begin with the end in mind, we can start with the mental creation and then follow through with the physical creation. So if I just keep this very simple, then what I'd be asking you in terms of effective leadership is to begin with the end in mind. Again, what I'd like you to do is to note, if you think about the mental creation in terms of leadership, what kind of leader would you like to be? Do you have a vision for your leadership? Do you have a vision for your team? Do you have a vision for your organization? So do we have that mental creation? Because we need to start with the mental creation to be able to move into the physical creation. And so each day we can begin with the end in mind. Each day we can start with the mental creation of the tasks and projects. And we can then consider what do we need to do to follow through on that. And that will lead us again into other habits. And so just giving you a little bit of time just to jot down now, what type of leader do you want to be? What is your vision for your team? And what's your vision for the organisation? If leadership is about providing direction, we need to be clear on beginning with that end in mind. Otherwise, nobody else will have that clear focus and direction. So moving in then, habit 3 is put first things first. So that's executing on the most important priorities. So, again, if we want to live a balanced life, then we need to realise that it is okay not to be doing everything. And it's okay to say no on occasions. So putting first things first is now going back to habit 2. Think about beginning with the end in mind. Think about that mental creation. What type of leader do you want to be? What vision do you have for your team and for your organisation? And if you're to prioritise by putting first things first, what would you start with? What do you need to start with? Those of you that are attending may or may not also be familiar with the urgent and important matrix. So that's considering what is urgent and important, what is important and not urgent, what is not important and not urgent, for example. And it's about prioritizing in that matrix. So if something is not important and not urgent, the question has to be, why is that on your list? If it is urgent and important, then that means that you're always going to be trying to do things immediately, and that's going to put you under pressure. And so what you want is for the majority of your tasks to be in the important but not urgent, because that means that you're able to plan. The important and urgent means that you're going to be reacting all the time. So do you have a to-do list? Is that list prioritized? And if you think about your life and that life that you want to live, what's important in terms of that life? What's important in terms of your leadership style? Where should you be focusing your attention? What are the things that you should be maybe passing on to someone else that really isn't important for you? So even just considering some of those things simply for today, let's take the small steps. If you're to prioritize this morning, if you're to do one thing today that would help you to become a more effective leader, what would you prioritize? What would be at the top of your list? And what's the thing that would drop off your list that you think it's okay now not to do? So moving then to habit 4, think win-win. So working effectively and efficiently with others to achieve optimal results. So think win-win isn't about being nice. It's a character-based code for human interaction and collaboration. So when we think win-win, the win-win attitude requires integrity, thinking about our values and our commitments and sticking with those. It's about maturity. It's about expressing ideas and feelings with courage and consideration. And so perhaps even in terms of thinking win-win and talking about that courage, it's the courage to get involved in the chat today without fear holding you back, that thinking that maybe something that you would put in the chat box may be viewed negatively as others. Everybody that's here today is here to learn, so please get involved in the chat box. And so abundance then as well, abundance mentality is really thinking about in terms of win-win, that there is plenty out there for everyone. The opposite of that is where some people might be, that, winning means that somebody has to lose. And thinking that we have to capture all in terms of business, being aggressive perhaps in our approach. And so this habit is more about thinking about the win-win, thinking about those relationships. So let's think about the relationships in terms of your team. How effective are those relationships within the team? Or do you as a leader think about in terms of your conversations that you've always got to win? Think about those relationships within the team, or even those in your personal life, as those relationships being emotional bank accounts. And in those bank accounts, like any other, you have deposits and you have withdrawals. So how often are you making withdrawals? And how often are you depositing? So what might be examples of a deposit? And what might be examples of a withdrawal? So an example of a deposit might be in terms of thinking win-win and developing that relationship. It might be about paying someone a compliment. It might be for you as a leader sticking to your commitments with the team. On the other side, the deposit might be not keeping to your commitments. It might be not being entirely truthful. So think about those relationships that you have. Perhaps even now, think about a relationship within the team that isn't where you would like it to be. And think about that relationship now and how you might develop it. In terms of think win-win, we could go back to be proactive, begin with the end in mind. We could think of the mental creation, how we would like that relationship to be. And then we can start planning and being proactive in terms of how we could develop that relationship. So being conscious about developing that relationship. So habit 5 then is seek first to understand, then to be understood. Habit 5 is all about communicating effectively and communicating effectively at all levels in the organisation. So if we think about communication, the little quote that I have here from Stephen Covey is, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. So be proactive, become self-aware. Are you the person that interrupts when someone is communicating with you? Are you really listening to what someone is saying? One thing I always like to remind people when we talk about communication is 38% of what we say is our non-verbals, and 7% of what we say is the verbals, the words that we use. So when we communicate, and if we're going to really listen with the intent to understand, then we need not only listen with our ears, but we also need to listen with our eyes, is to take in everything that individual is saying. So, if we think about it, as children, we spend time, years, learning to read and write. That's what we learn at school. Our parents and in school as well help us, teach us to speak. But what about the listening? So in terms of habit 5, it's considering now how you could develop your listening skills. Have you developed your listening skills? And if you feel as I'm asking some of these questions, the want to include some responses in the chat box, please feel free to do so. So how are my listening skills? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would I score those? And how am I going to improve my listening skills? What am I going to do? Am I going to take the time to develop those skills? So habit 6 then is synergize. So synergize is now innovating and problem solving with a view, with those who have a different view of our view, my view, your view. And so here, synergize is about 2 heads are better than 1. It's all about teamwork. It's about open-mindedness and adventure to finding new solutions to old problems. It is the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In terms of synergy, there are a few things that can get in the way. So fear, ego, anger, and jealousy can be blocks to synergy. So think about, how are you developing your team? Are you open-minded? Are you creating that adventure of finding new solutions? Or is your ego holding you back from hearing ideas and suggestions from the team? In terms of synergy, some of you may have heard me talking about silence. Is there silence within your team? Is there a culture of silence where people believe it's not okay to be themselves and to voice their opinions or to provide you with new ideas or feedback for fear of how you may respond? That they may be laughed at, they may be told that their idea is stupid, or you've looked at that idea before. So really thinking about, how do we synergize within the team? What am I doing to create the ability within the team to innovate and problem solve? So the question really is, what conditions would need to exist within your team to support synergy? What are those conditions that would be required? Moving now to habit 7. Habit 7 being sharpening the saw. So this is back to yourself, you being your most important asset. And this is about seeking to continuously improve and renew professionally and personally. So renewal here can come in 4 areas. And those 4 areas are on the physical sense. Is your eating, exercise and rest. So are you looking after yourself? You can't spend all your time sewing without having the time to sharpen the saw. So do you get that time to sharpen the saw, to look after yourself from a physical perspective? If so, what do you do? If not, what do you think that you could be doing to sharpen the saw? The second area within sharpen the saw is the social and emotional. And that's all of those social and emotional connections that we have with others. This takes us back to developing those relationships. So am I getting the time socially and emotionally to recharge and to sharpen the saw? The third element is mentally. So am I mentally able to renew and develop myself both professionally and personally? So from a mental perspective, am I giving my mind time, some downtime? So do I perhaps meditate? Is that something that works for me? Do I spend time reading, perhaps listening to music? Is art something that interests me? Do I paint or draw or create in terms of the art side of things? Do I write? So what we know even from research perspective, that writing how we feel helps to improve our mental health. So keeping an emotional diary can be useful to write down how we're feeling. That helps us to soften that if we want to get rid of, rather than bottling that and not sharing that. Spiritually then is the 4th element of sharpening the soul, and that's time and nature. It's expanding your spiritual self. And so you might, in terms of your spiritual self, it might be religion. Spiritual doesn't have to be about religion. It might also be about your service to others. So it could be also about volunteering. So there are 4 areas: physical, social and mental, social and emotional, mental and spiritual. So think about now, if we're talking about that, those 4 elements, what do you need to do to sharpen your soul? Because that's going to be key for you in terms of even this cycle. So being proactive, starting with the end in mind, will always be difficult for you if you're feeling tired, burnt out, even, for example. And burnout in the workplace is another webinar that I've done recently. So you can go back to the library if you want and watch that webinar as well. So what are the things that you need to do to sharpen your soul? So what I'm going to do now, as I would usually do, is I'm going to share with you now the ACT matrix. And the ACT matrix, what we're going to do now is just think about some of those questions that I've asked you, to write down. We're going to try to pull some of this together. So if we think about it here, we've got the external world and we've got the internal world. So very similar in terms of COVID. So the ACT matrix works very nicely with the 7 habits of an effective person, or leader in this case. So we've got the mental creation and the physical creation, so the internal world and the external world. And we've got what some of you would have known before I talk about away or towards. In this case now, these have been replaced with relief and satisfaction. So if we and the bit in the middle that's important is me noticing. So if we're going to be proactive and we're going to be responsible for our behaviours, our actions and our results, then we will need to notice. We'll need to spend time noticing if I'm in the internal world or the external world, and noticing what I am doing that is giving me relief or satisfaction. So we think about who and what's important to you. So this is where you're going to need to help me with the chat box because I want to use your examples here now. So in terms of becoming an effective leader, who is important to you? Who is important to you in terms of an effective leader? So I'm going to get started with the team. It could be colleagues, because to you it may be your view of yourself with your peers. Being an effective leader can also impact on your family and friends relationships. And our service users, absolutely. So the people receiving the end product, what we know is happy people within organizations means that we'll have happy customers. So this is hugely important, because if we're thinking about the people that are important in terms of the team and colleagues, we've got to think about those service users or customers. Okay, the other thing that I'm going to include here now as well is, let's think about, well, what's important. Okay, so what's important to you in terms of becoming an effective leader? These are things that we've talked about even as I've gone through COVI's 7 habits. So things that are important in terms of effective leadership are integrity, confidence, considerate, sensitive, open-minded, encouraging, proactive, maturity, abundance, growth, okay, so please feel free in the chat box to let me know what has come out for you so far in terms of what is important in terms of effective leadership. What's important for you in terms of effective leadership? Because earlier I talked about the purpose and values. So what's listed here in terms of what's important are those things that would be values. And so, what's important is to listen in terms of the team. So those are some examples of what's important to you. Now, over here, what we're going to do is we're going to look at, in terms of you as a leader, what is showing up, or what's been showing up for you that you would rather not experience. So what's showing up for you? So earlier we talked about the things that get in the way in terms of synergy are fear, ego, anger, jealousy, worry, stress, and anxiety. Anything that's been showing up for you that might be getting in the way of, your integrity, your confidence, considerate, sensitive, being open-minded, encouraging, proactive, maturity, growth. So, sometimes when we think about growth and development, being under pressure, you may feel like you don't have the time. So each and every one of you are feeling something. There are emotions that are showing up. And in the internal world, these are the things in terms of being proactive that we want to be aware of. So what is showing up in terms of those emotions? And because responsible people take responsibility for their emotions and their response to those. So in here, we also have thoughts. So I don't have time. We may make comments around they don't care is how we might view other members of the team. Those are thoughts that are going on in the internal world. And the question really then is, when those things show up, then in the external world, how do we respond to those? So what do you do to get rid of those unwanted stuff? So when fear shows up, when anger is showing up, when jealousy is showing up, worry, stress, anxiety, or feeling under pressure, let's take with the team, how do you respond to anger, anxiety, stress, or feeling under pressure when they show up? So what do you do when those emotions are showing up? So anyone willing to share, what do you do in terms of what's showing up? How do you respond? So you might shout at members of the team. You might go quiet. You might talk a lot. You might vent with colleagues about what's bothering you. And again, you may not share important information because fear is showing up. So these are some examples of what you might be doing to get rid of the unwanted stuff. And that is why we get relief. Now, the problem with this is many of you who have attended these webinars before will know that what we're saying here is when these emotions show up, there will always be a consequence. We will always do something in the external world. And when we shout, go quiet, talk a lot, vent, or not share important information, that generally will create another emotion. So what is that emotion and how are we responding to that? So it creates a vicious cycle. And what we want to do is to take the time to step back and to notice, what emotions are showing up, and notice what I would prefer to do that would give me satisfaction by moving me towards the leader that I would like to be. So what leader do I want to be? I asked you that question earlier. That's the bits that are important in the bottom right of this matrix. Now what we want to do is we want to look at then, okay, so if we then say, what would be important? So what could we do that would move us towards who and what is important to us? So if we think about Covey's 7 habits of effective people, in this case we'll say effective leaders, we want to focus on our circle of influence. So many of us will focus on our circle of control rather than our circle of influence. We also then, if we think about habit 2 is, what we want to do is to create a vision of ourselves and the team and perhaps the organisation if you are the business owner. And you could also create a to-do list using the urgent and important matrix. If you simply Google that, you will find pictures and articles of that if you're not already aware of it. So create on a to-do list using the urgent and important matrix that will help you prioritize what you should be doing that would move you towards being an effective leader, that vision of yourself. And then what we can do is we could also select relationships that need developing. So of those people that are important, which of those relationships require some development? And how will I go about developing those? Thinking about the what's important as well as the who's important. So what we could do is also spend time developing our listening skills and ask the team what they need for synergy. So asking the team, and also activities to sharpen the soul. So what I'd like you to do, again in the chat box, you've been a quiet group this morning. You're still there, so I know you're still listening. So in terms of sharpening the soul, can you give me some examples of what you've written down that you need to do to sharpen your soul? The time that you need to take to develop yourself in any one of those 4 areas that I discussed. Which would be the area that you would prioritize? Would it be physical? Would it be social and emotional? Would it be mental? Or would it be spiritual? What could you commit to doing over the next week to sharpen your soul? Anyone willing to include in the chat box now? Annual leave to recharge. Excellent, great. Thank you, Rachel, again for getting involved. So yeah, I think sharpen the soul. So take annual leave. I think one of the things at the moment is people have been reluctant to take annual leave because there's nowhere to go. But taking leave is hugely important. If you're going to be an effective leader, you need to take time out. And not working too much overtime is also right. So sometimes the question with the overtime is the more overtime we do, the less effective we become. And so it's a bit of a catch-22 situation because you're going to have to do more overtime because you're really not going to be as productive. So taking that time out, Matthew, great, thank you. So from a remote perspective, it'd be beneficial to focus on the emotional well-being. How they are in and out of work has a big impact on productivity. Absolutely. So Michael, I'm interpreting, I think, what you're saying. So in terms of sharpening the soul is you sharpening your soul. But I think, Matthew, sorry, what you're also highlighting there is considering the well-being of the team. So how can we develop the team? How can we think about their emotional well-being as well? And I'm going to come on to that and provide a little bit of guidance in terms of that. So yes, thinking about your own emotional well-being. If anybody's willing, again, I'd like to hear from you in terms of what do you do in terms of your own emotional well-being? How do you develop yourself from a social and emotional perspective, or even a mental perspective? How do you develop your mental well-being? So there are many of the apps available in terms of meditation. So it could be try meditation. It doesn't work for everybody, but you can certainly try it. It might be walking. And if you're going to walk, some of you may have heard me talk about before, is avoid the multitasking. So if you're going to walk, it's not walking and listening to music at the same time. Walking is about now walking in the external world and experiencing that with the five senses. So you can see here that the ACT matrix allows us now to pull the 7 habits together by asking these 4 key questions. I'm hoping that you've drawn an ACT matrix in front of you. And some of the questions that I asked earlier, you've got your own ACT matrix, which applies to you and your own personal circumstances. And if you haven't done, well, then it could be one of the things that you could do is to practice the ACT matrix, because that's about being proactive. It's about being proactive, and it's also about starting with the end in mind, because starting with the end in mind is our bottom right of the matrix. And so we need to develop habits 1, 2, and 3 before we can move to 4, 5, and 6. So when we are looking at becoming an effective leader and thinking about synergy, one of the things that is useful to do is to use the pro-social matrix with your team. So the pro-social matrix is very similar to the ACT matrix, but it's moving it up a level into the we. So the question in the bottom right of the matrix, now what we're talking about is the mental creation, is noticing and asking the team, what is our shared purpose? So even if I volunteer, what I'm going to do is, what is our shared purpose? What's important to the team? So it's asking them those questions, because that is the mental creation, hence it's in the bottom right in the internal experiences. Today, what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk you through this model rather than completing this, because we're not going to have the time today. So bottom left of the matrix then, again, in the internal world, what's showing up inside team members that gets in the way of achieving the shared purpose? This is about getting people to open up and to talk about their experiences, inner experiences and thoughts. This is hugely important in terms of creating a psychologically safe organization. This is about enabling people to show up as their true selves without fear of being ridiculed and laughed at. So what's showing up inside team members that's getting in the way? It's about you understanding as a leader the emotions that are showing up at work. And also then in the external world, it is then asking the question, so what behaviours or actions, again, what do they do to get rid of what is showing up inside? So as we had talked about, in the bottom left, there will be things like stress or frustration with projects, tasks, or people. irritation, feeling under pressure, time pressure perhaps. What do they do to move away from what's showing up inside? And that may be that they talk about people, they talk about members of the team, or perhaps complain even about members of the team. But psychologically safe teams, this has to be managed. So this isn't about having a free-for-all. This is about ensuring that the team, as we do with the ACT matrix, looks at each of these questions from a non-judgmental and compassionate viewpoint. So the fourth question then for you to ask the team is, well, what behaviours or actions, in other words, what could we do as a team that would move us closer towards that shared purpose? Now, if we think about the emotional bank accounts and developing that win-win, here what we need to think about, if we move to trying out the pro-social matrix with our team, and we ask that question around what could we do that would move us towards our shared purpose, then we've got to make commitments to work towards those. Otherwise, what's going to happen is it won't be a win-win. It'll be perhaps a lose-lose. So it's making those commitments, again, that can help in terms of the emotional bank accounts, because you're making deposits by following through on those commitments. In fact, the whole team are depositing in the team's account by all sticking with those commitments. If you'd like to know more about the pro-social, or you're interested in perhaps receiving training on both the ACT matrix and the pro-social, please feel free to get in touch. Use the book the 30-minute complimentary consultation button at the bottom of your screen. One of the things in terms of becoming an effective leader I would like to highlight is the being proactive and understanding what's showing up inside and your response to it. So it's being emotionally intelligent. And if you're wanting to develop that area, then I offer the Trait Emotional Intelligence questionnaire. So you complete this questionnaire. That produces a report which I share with you, and then we have a 1-hour feedback session. So you'll see from the picture on the left side of this slide, emotional intelligence in terms of the Trait Emotional Intelligence questionnaire is broken down into 4 factors and 15 facets. So each of those areas gets a score, which indicates you have an oversupply or an undersupply. And so the 1-hour feedback session is talking through what the report says rather than what you think it says. And helps them, what we do is help you to identify 3 areas of development. So that can be really useful. It's an insight into yourself and how you may be perhaps, well, it's a self-report, so it's not how you are perceived by others. So the stop, start, continue that I talked about earlier can be useful done in combination with this. So if you're interested in the Trait Emotional Intelligence questionnaire, then use again the book, the 30-minute free consultation. Or the other questionnaire that I talked about earlier is the personality profile assessment. So if you're interested in understanding your team better, in terms of synergy there, understanding the team better, then you could consider conducting the personality profile assessments for each member of the team. That can then be pulled together as a team profile, and that helps you to understand each individual's motivators, fears and values, and pull that together as a team. As we're just now approaching the 60 minutes of this webinar, again, please feel free to get in touch. Should you have any questions about what I've discussed this morning, I've provided my email address, Julie@JulieAllenConsulting. please feel free to visit our website. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Crowdcast, please follow us. On Crowdcast, following us means you'll always get an email making you aware of the next webinar that we are running. So thank you for those that took the time out to attend today. I hope it has been useful. Maybe just before you pop off, if you could put one word in the chat box to summarize this morning's session, or a commitment that you're going to make in terms of becoming a more effective leader than you are at the moment. I'd love to hear from you. Michael, thank you very much. Perspective. Matthew, thank you. That's great. Perspective, stepping back with a little bit of perspective, looking at my leadership from a slightly distanced perspective is really useful. Michael, thank you. Thoughtful as well. Great. Delighted to hear that. I'm always keen that you've taken time out. Seek first to understand, Rachel. That's a great one to be working on. You've taken 1 hour out of your very busy schedule to attend. So I'm always keen to make sure that I'm providing something that's useful and relevant for you. I'll be running another webinar in July again. And if you've signed up today, you'll get an email from me highlighting the topic of that webinar and the date of that. Thank you for attending. Best wishes with becoming a more effective leader, and I look forward to you joining us again in the next webinar. Take care. Stay safe.